right, I'm going to press play.
Yeah, my brother-in-law and my sister look after me for about nearly 5 years without the outside carer. My elder sister passed away. Yeah, and I get help from my friend. Yeah, and my friend just helped me to get a carer from the agency. And they let me sleep on the wheelchair all night. And morning I didn't have carer. I stuck in bed and wait until 7 p.m. and the carer came in the evening and get me up. But I said it's too late to get me up. Just help me to have a shower and a quick bowel care and go back to bed to sleep. Yeah. And they keep asking me to get my friend and family to help me. And I said, my family been helping me when I first had accident. They helping me for 5 years, nearly 5 years, without any care from outside. Until that, my family that can't be able to help me anymore. So I called the agency.
The NDIS, it was meant to give people the opportunity to have relationships that were in the appropriate dynamic. I remember reading in the Shutout report that was produced in 2010, it helped inform the NDIS when they were looking at the design of the scheme. And there were people just making comments about, I want my family and friends just to be that, family and friends. They shouldn't have to be carers. And I think that is really hard to manage those family dynamics. So the support role is really, really crucial. And it's so disappointing to see people in this situation so disempowered because they've been left in a wheelchair overnight. It makes me so angry.
And I feel very, very helpless. But I called the office, and the office told me that I have a new case manager. And I spoke to a new case manager, and he had no idea of anything. And I called the Minister of Housing and Disability, and I spoke to the lady in the office. And she transferred me straight to the state Victoria psychiatric or something. Yeah, and spoke to the lady, and the lady told me that I need help. And they said, yeah, I do. I really need help.
I think there's this misconception in society anyway that people with disability are just morbidly depressed because they have a disability, and that's not true. I have no doubt that Hung, provided with the appropriate support, he would have been able to live, the life he wanted to live.
And I called the agency again, and I told them that now I don't care because I even called a district nurse, but the district nurse said couldn't help me. And they said that I might need to call the ambulance. And make me feel very, very down. And I broke out crying. And then I called the agency again. I asked the agency again if you can ask the carer in the team if anyone can be able to help. And they said no. I said, that's okay. I don't care anymore. Doesn't matter who come or who go. I have my own decision, very smooth and very, very easy for myself and for everyone. Just forget everything, don't worry about me anymore.
It's a big ask if you're being denied the ability to get up and get dressed, go to the toilet, have breakfast and start your day. And if you're being denied that, it's a big ask, to maintain your composure and to continue as though troubled by anything.
And the coordinator asked me, you don't do any silly thing to yourself? And I said, I don't know. And then not long after that, I just hang up the phone, and for a few minutes, and the police came. And the police called the ambulance. And the police told me that I have to go to the hospital. And I said, I don't want to go to the hospital. I don't have any medical problems. I need to go to the hospital. I need carer. I don't need doctor or nurses. I need carer. Then the police told me that if I don't go to the hospital, and they have to arrest me.
Hung has spent nearly, it's over 2 months in hospital because he still doesn't have a fully staffed roster. He is also finding there are other people in hospital in the spinal ward that are in his position, that they are having to be hospitalised because there's not enough carers to fill their roster. These are people who live at home, which again is what the NDIS is really supportive of.
Oh, Hung,
No,
I'm sorry.
you're right.
In a way, it's a bit like welcome to our world, the world of people with disabilities. Yeah, us people with disabilities, even intellectual disabilities, are treated like second-class citizens and looked at like we don't belong in the community.
But I think that if he had the right support and got the right support that he needed, he could have got a lot more help.
Yeah, I agree too. If he had more support and help in that, they would have helped him in that.
And I know another person, exactly the same situation. She ended up back in the Austin for exactly the same reason. The shifts couldn't be filled. She ended up sitting in a wheelchair all night or staying in bed all day. And so finally she got unwell. And so had to go to hospital, not from the police, but she couldn't be cared for properly.
And is it the lack of carers, full stop, or properly trained carers? Because there are some cases where there are some carers available, but they don't have the training and experience necessary to look after a particular client. So that, I think now with maybe more people coming on board for services with the rollout of the NDIS, there are even less carers.
Exactly.
We need more carers.
We need more carers.
It looks like
but
we've got less.
Some of the problem that this girl had was that the carers were there, were rostered, but they just didn't turn up. They couldn't be bothered, or they didn't have that sort of commitment level.
So the organisation that's sending them should have policies and procedures in place to pick up that failing on the part of one of their employees and be able to replace them. But it sounds like what we're hearing is there are not enough carers to replace them with. So it's partly the system's not working, and partly there is a lack of supply of appropriately trained and qualified carers.
So, and the hospitals is not the other option. Hospitals shouldn't be having just people parked there.
Yeah.
I keep record when the carer come to help me, and they sign on the calendar. And when they left, they sign on the calendar that exactly the time, how many hours they work there. And when I need more extra hour, extra help, and I call the agency and I ask them that, can you get me a carer because I need extra hour, I have a bowel problem, or I need to go out or to see family or shopping or medical appointment. And many times they say that, sorry, you don't have hour. But I knew that I have quite some hour that are still in the bank.
We got a referral from one of Hung's carers who had been working with him for a long time. And so she had been watching what had been happening and had questioned the agency about what he was being billed for. That was the agency that she worked for, and was told, you need to mind your own business. So she did a Google of advocacy and she came to Leadership Plus. I had started work there 2 weeks, and Hung was probably one of my first cases that, I was going to be working with. So I then met with Hung and with his carer and said, okay, what's going on? Hung said he had his own records for the last 3 years. I said, great. And we looked through them and we asked for the agency to provide their records as well, and they didn't match. So the agency actually suggested, well, we obviously can't resolve this, so I think a complaint needs to be made to the Disability Services Commissioner. That was the agency's suggestion, which we were going to do anyway. So we did that, and the officer that looked at the complaint was pretty amazed at the discrepancies and the lack of oversight. So we then went through all of his records, all of their records really exhaustively, and we came up with a figure that the agency in theory agreed with, that yes, indeed, they had overcharged him by nearly 400 hours over the last 3 years. And so they said, yep, but mind you, I'm sort of, contracting how long it took, because it took about a year for them to get to that stage where they said, yes, it appears that you have been overcharged. So they said, yep, we'll pay it back. And then the agency collapsed and was merged by a bigger agency, was absorbed by a bigger agency. We contacted the new CEO and said, there's this agreement that these nearly 400 hours will be paid back, and their response was, we don't have any responsibility to do that. It's a totally new agency. That was them, not us. So I then put in a complaint to Department of Health and Human Services, I suppose asking them for oversight on what essentially was their money that had gone missing, this 400 hours of support hours. They reluctantly became involved, and another meeting was had where the new agency was directed to repay those funds.
Call me cynical, but how do you overcharge 400 hours? It's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, Hung had a relationship, a relationship with his worker, and it was through his worker that he managed to access advocacy.
Yeah.
Now, if that one person hadn't have been there, I'm not sure where Hung would be now.
The 400 hours that he's going to be reimbursed with.
Yeah.
Well, what about all the other people out there that can't self-advocate like him? Surely it's not just a complete fluke that he's the only person that's been obviously, flagrantly ripped off by a disability service provider. Yeah. Or, what sloppy bookkeeping is going on in that organisation that, how can this be that all those hours that they've billed him for never happened?
One of my fantasies is that in some space somewhere soon that people will get the opportunity to be involved in the recruitment of the staff that are providing assistance to them, and that they are involved in the formal training of some of these people.
Well, that's what choice and control is, and
That's
there are
right.
some platforms now coming in with the NDIS that are allowing for that. I know a few people with fairly high support needs that have been involved in that recruitment and
It's
selection
really
process.
exciting, Lauren.
It is. It's great, and it's disappointing that people like Hung have kind of paved the way for that, and I'm so frustrated to see that he's fallen through the cracks of the system, but hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
But then another issue emerged, which was that Hung only had about 3 or 4 regular carers rostered to his program, and he probably needed about double that. And so we said to the agency, you need to be recruiting more carers. And they said, yes, we're trying. This was an agency with 900 staff. For over a year, they said they were trying to recruit new carers, and not one new carer came on board. So after about a year, they had a meeting with Hung and myself, and they said, we need to exit Hung from this agency. We can't provide carers. We're having to outsource to fill his roster, and that's costing us money. So DHHS again was brought in to facilitate the transition to a new agency. Something went on behind closed doors and the agency said, okay, we won't exit him. We just won't recruit any new carers. So he can keep his 3, but you need to get another agency to provide, to fill the rest of the roster. So then we got another agency on board, but it was just at that time of the NDIS rollout beginning and their resources were really stretched. So it was this mad scramble to fill his roster at any cost, and it meant that the people didn't have the training, the shadow shift training, to work with Hung, so they were just sort of sent in at short notice. He needs a carer for that shift, you need to go in there. There was even talk at one point from his case manager about, well, if he can't get a fully staffed roster at home, then he might have to think about going into institutional care, like group home or aged care. And I said, well, that surely isn't economically viable compared to him living in his own home. And the case manager agreed, said, yes, I know, but I'm just telling you how the system would look at it, that if he can't have a fully staffed roster, he needs to go into, institutional care, where there is 24/7 care put into place. Now, what that standard of care is a whole other question, but it means that he won't be left without care at home.
And now we've got this suggestion that, well, you could go and live in an institution and have 24/7 care.
Which is not your choice.
Yeah, it's great idea.
Well, this has been going on for long. Well, our motto is to try and close all institutions and put people into CRUs where they can learn more independently living and get the moral support that they need.
Or even in their own homes.
Or even in their own
better,
homes.
But we haven't got that far yet.
But that's their argument. Doesn't make economic sense, they agreed, but it'll kind of take the problem away.
We know what quality of life looks like, and it looks like when you get to spend time with your friends, when you get to spend time with your family, when you have some freedom of movement within your home, when you have a home. These aren't kind of spaced out ideas of grandeur that people are wanting, to be able to live in their home and have a life of some dignity and quality is not an unreasonable ask.
Yeah, well, I know people that are in that situation of not really being able to keep their own records. I've got friends who are blind and also wheelchair users, and if you're blind, you can't do the spreadsheet thing so easily. And also a lot of older people who are blind don't have the ability to use the internet because they haven't been trained yet. So there's so many barriers, and you can't just assume everyone's got the capacity to be able to manage their records appropriately. I'm so glad that in Hung's case, he had kept those records, because you hate to think where he'd be otherwise. And I don't know where the oversight in the system is, because you'd like to think that at least someone's coming in and auditing those service providers on a regular basis. But this went on for 3 years and nobody picked it up. And it was only because he'd picked it up himself that anything was done.
What I'm really worried about is that the NDIS works on that model, which is you need to be controlling and coordinating your services personally.
Yeah, so there needs to be some independent sort of organisation that oversees that and has authority.
It needs auditing things,
Yes.
and they have to know that they're going to be audited, because it's not fair to Hung to hold them to account. He should be able to do his receipting and things and expect that that's the way it's supposed to be running.
Absolutely, yes.
Something that's really frustrated me, especially with the NDIS being introduced, is that they're introducing this quality and safeguards framework that will be a national approach to trying to actually manage all of these issues and provide some level of oversight to avoid things like this from happening. But it frustrates me that that's not going to be in place until the NDIS is fully rolled out. In the meantime, there's all of these state-based arrangements in place, and some are working better than others. But obviously in Victoria, this was able to happen.
Should we talk about complaints? Conciliation?
Sure. I think any of those mechanisms we have in place, whether it's at the state level or federally, even the Disability Discrimination Act, they're all really toothless tigers in a sense, because the onus is still on the individual to try and defend and uphold their rights. And no one comes in over the top and says, you know, you've done the wrong thing here and therefore this is going to be the consequence. That just doesn't happen.
The different complaints agencies, whether it's Ombudsman or Health Services Commission or Disability Services Commissioner, it is a conciliatory approach. Get everyone in the room, let's all talk about the issue, and then you all go away and solve it by yourselves. So there isn't that follow through afterwards. It's definitely left up to the advocate and, you know, to a lesser degree, the person who's making the complaint, the person with the disability, to keep agitating for things to change, for systems to change, for people to be held responsible. So we don't feel as advocates that there is enough support there from those complaints mechanisms when you make a complaint.
Nearly 4 years now, but yeah, that seems like that a never-ending story. Yeah, one problem after the other, and it grows bigger and bigger.
The conciliation model can really let people down because it's yet more talking. It often involves them telling their story yet again. A lot of the people that I've worked with take action, like a complaint to whatever body, and go through the conciliation process, often not for themselves, but for the people who in the future may experience what they have experienced.
I come across that very frequently in my work, is people just say, it's not about me, I want this not to happen to anyone else ever again. And I don't necessarily want new advocates coming into the field to think that those systems can't offer any redress, because certainly they can be useful and it's what we've got to work with, so we need to be able to work them, you know, to the best of our ability. But I do think there's room for improvement in the system overall.
Whoever it is, the other party, they do have to participate and be present, and there is an independent third party there, and there's a lot of power and there's a lot of strength in that that third party witness. But conciliation can be tricky.
And very confronting for the individual involved, as you said. You know, the person's usually in a point where they're already psychologically distressed over what's happened, and then you put them in a situation where you've got to get in a room with all of those people who are involved again and retell your story. And it's really hard for people, and it's difficult as the advocate to be able to try and manage that as well. So I think it's something that we need to, again, it's about the peer support and advocates working together to try and manage that, but it's a flawed system. Your experience as an advocate, how familiar are people outside the disability sector or the disability advocacy sector with the Charter, do you think?
What Charter?
Yeah, exactly right.
It's really, it's very disappointing and extremely concerning that I've had to raise the Charter right to movement, for one. Even while he was in hospital, there were different rules depending on the ward he was in. So even down to that level, at one point he was told no, he wasn't allowed to leave the hospital. He was under their care, he couldn't have day leave. And it was just arbitrary. There wasn't any rationale for it because he wasn't ill, he wasn't injured, he was in hospital because his care system had broken down. So I had to raise the Charter in order for him to have day leave, and that is in place now. So they did pay attention to the Charter.
We are disabled people. We already we feel lonely and isolated. And the people closest to us, the carer. And carer are our life. Yeah, because we can't survive without carer. But I can see that they have the policy that like they don't want the carer and clients get close to each other, communicate.
We've got an NDIS system the philosophy behind it, the drive behind it was about human rights. It was built on the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. And yet all of that is sort of put to one side while we look at how this business is sustainable. How are things going to operate in the market environment? And it's almost like we've gone from the charity model to the market model, and we just skipped that human rights stage in between.
For Victorian statutory authorities, where they're supposed to comply with it, so it does provide you with a framework to talk about the issues that you're concerned with in relation to advocacy. But you might have the framework to wax lyrical about rights, but it doesn't compel change in a way that you hope that it might.
I think we can often feel the weight of the world on our shoulders as advocates to have all of the answers, but we've got to remember that there's a lot of support around us, and that it's okay to, bounce ideas with people, because we all approach things in different ways, and I'll often do that and think, oh, that's amazing, why didn't I think of that? So, yeah.
We have a lot of meetings with a lot of different departments and different people. But until now, I still feel like I am in limbo. When the NDIS roll out, they promised that the clients are disabled people have more choice, and we get more quality services. But there's no quality of care or no quality of service from the agency, the care provider agency, and how can we get a quality service? That's the problems.
I'm frustrated because I expected there to be a happy ending at the end of all of this. And sadly, I know realistically in advocacy that doesn't always happen, but it would just be nice to think that the NDIS could come in and fix a situation like this.
Da, 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 with the cape on.
Yeah, I think we all knew the avenues in the old system. It was, if you wanted to advocate, there was ways to advocate. But I think advocating now, you're advocating into a very fluid environment. And there's a whole lot of people who've got responsibility in some ways and other ones in other ways, but how you actually make someone accountable at this time when they're just designing their their business models and things is really hard to know. So I think, this advocate's showing that she knows what the issues are. She and her person she's advocating for can articulate them all quite well. But who are they speaking to?
Yeah, and I think knowing which playground you're playing in is critical, especially for advocacy, because you need to understand the different complaints mechanisms, and depending on where you are, whether it's ILC, whether it's aged care or NDIS, there'll be different things you need to learn how to navigate in order to get the right outcome for someone.
It's all in the nuance.
That's it. All in the Googling.
Yes, and I think there's probably, there was a bit of a feeling among people who probably don't know much about the disability sector that once the NDIS rolled out, everybody's problems would soon be solved, and we wouldn't need any advocates anymore because nobody's got a problem to advocate about.
Yeah, but it's turning out to be more.
Sort of, that's right. Well, just the new system itself as it rolls out and the interface with the old state system is, bringing about a need for more advocacy than ever before.
And then say, Horn can actually speak for himself, and yet the people wouldn't listen. So it's like everyone needs an advocate on their shoulder to give them a strong enough voice to actually do what the NDIS is asking them to do, which is speak for themselves.
That's right.
Which doesn't make any sense at all, but that's the way it's actually rolling out.
Yeah, well, it does change the power imbalance to have an advocate beside you, and you, the person with a disability, can speak for yourself often, but if you're sitting there alone doing it, that's different dynamics from if you've got an advocate from one of the various advocacy organisations with you, just alongside of you, really, not often not having to say very much at all, but just to be there.
But to try and redress that power imbalance a bit.
Can make a difference, yes, yeah.
More and more people are starting to say when the services are not right, but there are still a lot of people who are scared to do that for whatever reason. So I guess that's the thing that Reinforce are there to change, to say it is okay to complain.
Resolving complaints, intricacies about people's lives, they're not straightforward, okay, if I do X, we're going to get Y. You know, they're not simple equations.
No.
So it does, the job does require emotional maturity and I think support from one another. Our agency has counselling as well that we can access. I'm also involved in the peer support network for advocates because I think it's really important that we learn from one another.
And I think it's really critical to see how other people approach things because, as you've said, there's no clear-cut formula to be followed, really. It's 98% problem solving and 2% knowing how to problem solve. But I think, especially given the...
I think there's a bit in there now about Googling, we were saying
Yes,
earlier.
Googling. I don't know what people did before Google, really.
That's right.